just right so it's not all over the place. I don't think it wants to be just right. We may have to adjust. Okay, so today I'm talking about a weird topic for today, the poetic elegy. We always think of an elegy as a poem upon death. It's contemporary elegy, not really that. That's a Greek kind of form that has a kind of standard setup for the ancient Greeks. But today we are contemporary. We think however we want to about loss and change, death, all those kinds of topics. So just going to talk a little bit about the what an elegy is to me. I'm going to share an elegy I wrote. That's a Greek word that describes a mournful poem. It's related to that word eulogy, nice things we say about dead people, right? But today's a joyful day. We get to celebrate Sue on her retirement. And Sue, of course, is very much alive. But an elegy isn't just for the dead, as I said. It's merely a poem that makes space to honor a loss. When I say it makes space, I think of my little Pomeranian buddy who will come between me and my husband to the warm spot between us and curl around into a tight little bud and be there the whole night. So that's how it makes space when you have a big feeling. If you've been to any of my talks before, you know I'm obsessed with poetry, and poems are kind of how I process big feelings. And for me, loss is the biggest feeling I have. I was lucky to go through my childhood without losing anybody. I did lose my dad when I went off to college, and that was number one. That was the first loss for me, and you never get over that loss. The poet Laurie Anderson, songwriter Laurie Anderson, said in a song, "When my father died, it was as if a library had burned down." I think is an amazing thing to say, and so true about my dad too, who knew everything. So now that I'm in my 50s, and when I approached my 50s, people just started dropping like flies. My ex-husband, who was my best friend, my mom, my brother, my cat, it just goes on and on. So you start to get very well acquainted with loss this season of life. It's not fair. You know, we just lost Jenna from our winter friends who come here, and that was a painful loss too. But each loss kind of pulls you down a little further. For me, it's kind of literal, that hunched shoulder, close to the earth. And I try to find my way to the light through poems, and that's always offered me a way forward. So, sorry about coughing into the microphone. So again, elegy is poetic form devoted to loss. Traditionally, it laments the death of someone who was loved or revered, but over time it's evolved, and it can now mourn not only people, but relationships, landscapes, identities, ways of life. It could be personal, it could be collective, something we all share, it could be political. And in this flexibility, it becomes a map through grief, which is nice to have. Because you feel that grief is kind of like being lost in the wilderness. It's hard to find your way through it. Every new grief is new. It doesn't matter if you've been through grief 100 times before. Each time it happens again, it's new. So you need a map. Like I was saying before, historically, and I'm talking about the Greeks, elegies followed a three-part structure, three movements kind of, and they mimic the emotional journey that we go through when there's a loss. And it's more historically true than it is today, like I said. First, there's a lament. That's a direct expression of sorrow or anguish. The poet kind of names the loss, lets it breathe, lets us sit with the pain, right? Second, traditionally, is praise. Praise for the person who's lost, often idealization of the person who's lost. And it's where we begin to make meaning. It's not really escapism, this idealizing I'm talking about. It's more like honoring, and that comes transformation. As we praise what's gone, we acknowledge its value, and we reassert it against oblivion, so it doesn't disappear. And then the third part, consolation, provide comfort in an elegy. Poet gestures toward acceptance, peace, or spiritual continuity. So it's not always religious. Sometimes it's nature that consoles, or memory, or the art of the elegy itself. This artifact, this poem, is its own comfort. And in this third movement, grief doesn't disappear, but it softens and it takes on its own shape. It becomes more bearable as a result. I don't know if this has been true for you when you've lost somebody, but I found the culture wants you to move on. You've lost somebody, and the culture wants to quickly tell you they're in a better place. Move on. It's, why are you grieving? The stone's rolled away. Why are you looking for the living among the dead? Well, because he's my dead. And I loved him, and I wanted to wash him, and I came today. It's gone. That's painful every time. But poetry doesn't rush us. In fact, poetry is the slowest thing in the world, right? If you've ever sat through a poetry reading, there's nothing slower than getting to the point in a poem sometimes. The elegy lets us dwell on what's gone, and it tells us you don't have to be done loving what's gone, right? So in doing so, an elegy gives us permission to feel and to remember and to speak. Other people might feel uncomfortable when you talk about your loss, especially death, right? But the elegy almost luxuriates in it, gives you permission to just kind of bask in everything you're experiencing. In a moment when loss can make us feel voiceless, an elegy, a poem, can give us voice. And sometimes we borrow the voices of others by reading their elegies. Sometimes we write our own. Reading an elegy is a way of being accompanied by somebody else's sorrow and by their attempt to survive it. So, that notion of comfort and shared sorrow. An elegy does not erase pain, and it doesn't try to, but it offers comfort in two essential ways. One, it's a witness. It tells the reader, you're not alone. Others have felt what you're feeling. Others have endured. It's not a small thing. When you're dealing with grief, connection is big medicine. It's what helps you kind of get through something. And then through form. An elegy is a structured poem. Like I said, it used to have kind of a structure that was formal and you had to follow, but just having words on a page in a shape that you can come back to, and they're always the same every time you look at them, that structure, it helps with grief because it's always there. It's always something you can go back to. And grief feels like a formless void. So having an elegy that attempts to make sense of it, gives it shape, and lets you kind of bear up. We may not believe the consolation a poem, any words offer us, but the attempt can soothe us. Form is a way of being held. So, as I said earlier, modern elegies are not always about death. They can mourn a home you lost to a fire. They can mourn a language. I come from Appalachia, and I've lost my y'all. I don't say y'all anymore at all. But it's my native tongue, but it's gone, and sometimes I miss it because I have to say y'all is a very handy word. But language seems to have overlooked English language. Other languages haven't. So lost selves, remember who you used to be, who you aren't anymore. Sometimes that's glorious, right? Not being who you used to be might be the biggest glory, and then sometimes you're size 18 and you remember being a size 8 and you think that's not so glorious, but you can mourn your lost self, who you used to be, the ideas you used to have, the values you used to have. Even if you are better now, there's still a part of you's gone. You might say dead. So you can write an elegy for that. Also, as we face climate change, we might have an elegy to a glacier, to trees, to, when I was little, I would look up from southeastern Ohio and I'd see the stars in the sky, and I always thought they would be there. Silly me. I thought the stars were constant, but I don't see them anymore. You don't see them the same way. You can go to a dark sky national park where you can see the sky perfectly, but that's not my southeastern Ohio sky. My sky's gone, and I miss it. And I miss being able to look up anywhere and see the stars. Right? And we're not in a giant city, but there's enough light pollution that you just can't see it. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's an elegy that I can imagine expressing. These elegies, poems about loss, help us grieve what we're told not to grieve and what we're told to forget. So in this way, it's both ancient, like the Greeks, and timely. Always been a poem for the moment after, when something's gone and we're left to figure out how we're supposed to go on. So, as I said many times, elegy, it's not just about the dead, it's ultimately for the living, and gives us a way to say goodbye without letting go, a way to carry what we've lost without being crushed by loss, and a way to love something even when they're gone. And that's the truest comfort, not in forgetting, but in remembering deeply and honestly. I wanted to share something. By the way, let me interrupt myself to say, this day, Sue's last day in the pulpit, up front, being our spiritual leader formally. She'll always be our spiritual leader if we've taken in sort of what she's talked about. But Sue is getting ready to have this amazing time in retirement, traveling with this guy who loves to go places and have fun. And you know she's going to be doing all kinds of great things. While I talk about elegy, I hope you can separate this idea of death poem from the idea of processing loss, because there's no death here. There's only more and more life. So I wanted to share something. Oh, yeah.
There's also no loss.
Yeah.
There's nothing to lose.
Jerry's saying there's nothing to lose. We've lost our microphone. So I have to convey that.
It's here somewhere.
It's here somewhere. Dad's here. My mom's here.
For me, I just see that, I don't have any reason to ever be sad.
Yeah, Jerry's saying he has no reason. I'm conveying this.
Okay, that's fine.
Jerry's saying he has no reason to be sad. Elaborate, Jerry.
Because you cannot lose anything. There is no loss.
Yeah.
And so
there's no loss.
there are societies who have a party when someone dies.
Yeah.
And they actually have a funeral for someone who's born.
Yeah.
They're so saddened for what this individual has to go through.
Yeah.
And so it's all, I guess, it's in perspective.
Yeah.
Of what and how we look at life. And I just want to look at life every morning when I wake up as brand new. It's all out there waiting for me. And I just have to learn how to deal with the circumstances.
Yeah. Now, Jerry's saying, for those of you at home, that he wants to wake up every day with a sense of awe and wonder for the newness, and that there's actually no loss in this cyclical life that we live. There was no beginning either, by that logic, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say the flip side of that, and I think what Jerry said is wonderful. If you can live in that space, that's great. The reality is, though, when people do feel lost, they feel lost. Yeah. And if you tell them there's no loss, it's actually a very rude thing to say. Because
Paul is noting that loss is real to people who experience loss, and they don't want to hear that there's no loss.
It's painful. You just bring more pain to it. And they perceive it as you're judging.
Yeah. So people in loss can experience that kind of language as.
And I agree entirely. It's because each and every one of us have our own perspectives on what is happening to us at the moment.
Jerry's saying,
and I understand that. You know, at the same time, don't get upset at me if I don't sit down and cry with you.
Yeah, but he's not gonna cry with you.
Probably
he'll be
not.
there.
I'm probably
he'll
not.
give you a tissue.
just saying. Just saying. You know.
I will cry.
Oh, a call is Bill.
There you go. There you go.
Call a call.
So,
Here is something about Elegy that I wanted to convey. I've got some videos to show you. These are three elegies. I have examples of it. I'm going to start with Joy Harjo. She used to be Poet Laureate of the United States. She's Native American, Muskogee. I think she might be Muskogee. And she wrote a book called, well, what did she call it? Washing My Mother's Body. And what happened, and you have to pay attention to this in the poem, she's going to introduce it by noting she did not get to wash her mother's body. In this very important time, the veil between here and there is wide open, and there's this mystical thing that's happened. Somebody's transitioned from their body into spirit, and her sister called the mortuary too soon, and these guys in suits show up at her house to take her mom's body away. And she lets them. And she never got to wash her mother's body, which was important to her. So I'm saying a lot of things she's going to say. But she wrote a poem, and I'm only going to play part of this, very long poem. But in the poem, she washes her mother's body. And she never really did that. And pay attention to that, because poems don't have to be, I'm a journalist, so don't tell my editor. Not everything you write has to be true, right? Poems don't have to be factually, don't have to have a fact check team to go through them with a fine-tooth comb. Poems have their own truth. And in this poem, she washes her mother's body. And this talk today is about death, and that's a belated trigger warning. You knew the title, I suppose, if you came here. But let's look at a few minutes from this poet, Joy Harjo.
So here I was writing along, doing these poems based on my father's side of the family, and then here comes this poem. I didn't expect to write this poem either, and but you know how things build up in you, and it had always been that I didn't get to wash my mother's body. I was with her the last months of her lung cancer, and she never looked like anyone who was done. And in fact, she would always eat 2 desserts. And that morning, I remember I called the hospice worker. I won't go into all the story, but I realized from that moment on, I began my role of midwifing her to the other side. And I remember when the hospice worker came in and looked at her and said, "Oh, she doesn't look like she's going to die." She didn't say that, though. She just said, maybe she just caught something, and then half hour she was gone. And all of us around her. So it was a beautiful death. And but immediately, my sister called the funeral home. I wasn't in there. I was in there with my mother, kind of singing and talking to her spirit and in her body, sitting with her, kind of sitting centrally in her body. And I decided I'm going to wash my mother's body. And then next thing I know, here are these men in suits, which is unusual. We don't usually see men in suits in our home. And here are these men in suits coming to take her. Strangers. To me, that struck me as like, wait a minute. This is one of the most sacred moments. This is our mother. This is, in those moments, like childbirth, there is a door that opens wide. And it's a door to sacredness. And so it's important to keep that. It's helpful if we think good thoughts and we are helpful. So I decided not to make a fight. First I was upset and I thought, no, I'll let it go. But it made me think about what we do at these moments. We hand our beloved ones over to strangers instead of taking care of some of these things on our own. And it bothered me, and so I put it somewhere and went on, and then I realized through writing this poem, and this is for you too, that sometimes there are people that there's no way you can talk to them. They might still be living, and they're kind of dead to you because you've reached an impasse, but sometimes you can sit and write. You can write as a poem, you can write it as a story, a letter, but you can talk to them that way.
It's the important takeaway.
Maybe there's, somebody that's gone on and you weren't able to be there and you feel guilty, or for some other reason they will still hear you. You can write a poem, you can talk to them, you can sing to them. And I learned that writing this poem. I never got to wash my mother's body when she died. I returned to take care of her in memory. That's how I make peace when things are left undone. I go back and open the door. I step in to make my ritual, to do what should have been done, what needs to be fixed so that my spirit can move on, so that the children and grandchildren are not caught in a knot of regret they do not understand. I find the white enamel pan she used for bread and biscuits. It's the same pan she used to bathe us when we were babies. I turn the faucet on and hold my hand under the water until it is warm, the temperature one uses to wash an infant. I find a clean washcloth in a stack of washcloths. She had nothing in her childhood. She made sure she had plenty of everything when she grew up and made her own life. Her closets were full of pretty dresses, so many she had not the time to wear them all. They were bought by the young girl who wore the same flower satin dress to school every day, the one she had to wash out every night and hang up to dry with the wood stove. I pick up the bar of soap from her sink, the same soap she used yesterday morning to wash her face. When she looked in the mirror, did she know it would be her last sunrise? I move over pill bottles, a clock radio on the table by the bed, a pen, and set down the pen. I straighten the blankets over her to keep her warm for dignity. I start with her face. Her face is unlined even 2 months before her 80th birthday. She was known for her beauty. As I wash my mother's face, I tell her how beautiful she is, how brave, and how her beauty and bravery live on in her grandchildren. Her face is relaxed, peaceful. Her earth memory body has not left yet. But when I see her the next day embalmed and in the casket in the funeral home, it will be gone. Where does it go? It is heavier than the spirit who lifted up and flew. I think of it making the rounds to every place it has loved to say goodbye. Goodbye to the house where I brought my babies home, she sings. Goodbye to June's bar where I was the shuffleboard queen. I cannot say goodbye yet. I will never say goodbye. I lift up.
This poem goes on. I think it's amazing, and I would let you hear the whole thing, but we have to say some time today. So, isn't that beautiful, though? She's allowed herself, in the space of the poem, to have a ceremony for her mother. Poems let us do what needs to be done emotionally. And some of you aren't poets, right? Jerry, who's a poet here? I think we've got some poets. You've written poems. Yes, Paul's a poet. Yeah. So, poems let us do what needs to be done. There's an altar inside all of us, and we put on it the things we love and value. And that way, we're all poets. Some of us try to convert this into words, so we're literal poets. And some of us use music, and some use paint. Some of us just are able to accommodate these vast feelings inside of us, and they don't place that tiny pinprick near the knot of the balloon that lets the air out slowly, right? And I don't know how they do it. For me, the poem is the pinprick, and it lets the grief go gradually. Because we know sometimes grief pops in your face, scares the hell out of you. So here's another way to write an elegy. I love this. This is Galway Cannell, who's a great American poet, passed away, writing for one of his literary forefathers, Robert Frost, somebody he met when he was a young man. He went to Robert Frost's farm in Ripon, Vermont, and talked to him. That must have been an amazing experience for a young poet to talk to Robert freaking Frost, right? But there is such a funny, mocking tone. In the beginning, he's making fun of him. And I think it's kind of hilarious. And then there's this is a 5-part poem. We're going to listen to the first 2 parts. The second part, he's remembering a moment from history where Robert Frost gave the inaugural poem for John F. Kennedy. Do you happen to remember that? Steve, you might have been around. How about?
I was around.
Doesn't ring a bell. What happened is the sun hit his white pages, and he was an old, doddering guy, and he looked for a moment like he was just going to keel over. And then you'll hear what happens in the poem, which is amazing. This is sadly not read by Galway Cannell. I've heard him read it, but I couldn't find that. This is read by somebody who speaks beautifully. So, for Robert Frost by Galway Cannell.
For Robert Frost by Galway Cannell.
Like
1. Why do you talk so much, Robert Frost? One day I drove up to Ripton to ask. I stayed the whole day and never got the chance to put the question. I drove off at dusk and went out and thinking of both ears. Robert Frost, were you shy as a boy? Did you go on knick-knack for some long period of solitude? Is it simply that talk doesn't have to be muted and alone? Or is talk distracting from something worse? 2. I saw you once on the TV, unsteady at the lectern, the flimsy white wreath of hair standing straight up in a knot among top hats, old farmer and son of worse winters than this, stopped in the first dazzle of the District of Columbia, suddenly having to pay for the cheap onion skin, the worn-out ribbon, the eyes wrecked from writing poems for us. Stopped, lonely before millions, the paper jumping in your grip. And as the presidents also on the platform began flashing nervously their presidential smiles for the harmless old guy, and poets watching on the TV started thinking, well, that's the end of that tradition. And the managers of the event said, boys, this is it. This son of a bitch poet is going to croak. Putting the paper aside, you drew forth from your great faithful heart the poem.
Putting the paper aside, you drew forth from your great faithful heart the poem. This moment of triumph. He's describing this old guy, and it's one of his last public appearances, who's losing it, and people are like, God, this guy's going to die right here at the inauguration on TV. But putting the paper aside, you drew forth from your great faithful heart the poem. That's a big departure from how it started. I don't know if you remember. Why do you talk so much, Robert Frost? One day I drove up to Ripton to ask. I stayed the whole day, never got a chance to ask the question. So but he starts out by making fun of this garrulous old fellow who just talks and talks. Is it because you don't have to use meter and rhyme in your poem? Well, isn't this a weird way to remember somebody? This is a poet who has kind of spiritual permission, as we all do, to remember somebody the way he wants to, right? He can remember Robert Frost however he damn pleases, and it's disrespectful, but it's also beautiful. And it goes on to be beautiful some more, but it never loses that tone of, I don't know, it's not a Greek elegy. It's not following those rules I talked about. Any thoughts on that poem? What do you guys think? They loved it.
I had a hard time following, just because
A little
I had a
softer.
harder time hearing.
Well, you need Auden
I guess.
because he reads beautifully. Now this is the poet. Let me make sure there's nothing I wanted to say. I just wanted to reemphasize that it's okay to mock. There's, in your personal reflection on loss, you're allowed to have any tone. There is no wrong way. The world will tell you when you lose, there is a wrong way. there is not a wrong way to mourn, and it's okay to rib the dead. They don't care. So I'm speaking to
No, I have to say that's yeah, because I don't exist anywhere in this form. That's all.
No, I
You know, I mean, it's like and you can blame ACIM for this.
A Course in Miracles is being blamed.
Well, it's just that the fun I have with it now, in knowing that what I thought was so real is just not.
Yeah, Jerry's saying there's actually fun in
It is.
the lack of reality of this life. So that's a beautiful perspective. Now, this next poet, Auden, is a great British poet, and he's written an elegy for W.B. Yeats. If you know Yeats, he wrote the Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now to the Lake Isle of Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. He's another great poet, and they're probably as close in age as Frost and Cannell were, but this is another poet remembering a mentor. And here's a line in here: the words of the dead man are modified in the guts of the living. That's what this topic's about. How the words of the dead man, I'm getting around to it anyway, the words of the person who's gone are modified inside of you. We all kind of have some of that going on for us. Somebody's leaving us, and her words have definitely modified me. So take that away. Here's W.H. Auden.
He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. Oh, all the instruments agreed. The day of his death was a dark, cold day. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on from the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable quay. By morning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself. An afternoon of nurses and rumours. The provinces of his body revolted, the squares of his mind were empty, silence invaded the suburbs, the current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. Now he is scattered among 100 cities, and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood, and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom, a few thousands will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. Oh, all the instruments agreed. The day of his death was a dark, cold day.
It's an interesting moment in the poem when he says that the voice of the poet stilled, and he says he became his admirers. He's just slamming people who try to understand Yeats, but they're just kind of dead, and Yeats now joins them. So not very nice. But there you go. So, like I said, the words of the dead man are modified in the guts of the living. The line says what I'm trying to say, but Auden says it, of course, much better. When people transition from us, where are the ones left with the vast and terrible energy of their leaving? Mainstream Christians comfort themselves with the idea that people are in glory land. I'm not sure how you're supposed to mourn such a gleeful prospect, right? It's not fair not being able to mourn, not to let your sadness be your sadness. And even we see the end as a transition into a peace and a presence that's magnificent in its scope. I'm also not sure how we're supposed to mourn with that idea in mind, that our people are always with us when they go, even though we're alone at the breakfast table with our oatmeal. That's supposed to be a comfort. They're here. You just can't see them. Well, sometimes that's a cold comfort, like cold oatmeal. The transition we're thinking about today is permanent. The life of the church is going to be transformed forever by losing our spiritual leader and getting a new one. And it's changed, I think, by the knowledge that we won't have Sue's wisdom to ponder every Sunday. And I have to say, Sue is a smiling presence, and she is a towering intellect. And I don't think because she is like a living sunflower, I don't think we acknowledge the fact that she is a freaking genius. We won't have this kind of towering mind to guide us through. She worked slowly on me. I didn't see it at first, that she was like well read and brilliant and insightful. She just seemed nice lady who changed my whole everything. So we're not gonna have her wisdom to ponder every Sunday and for the week after, and for a period of months at least, she's not even going to be allowed to hang out here, so we can enjoy her as a person who's not preaching to us. It's a rule that kind of infuriates me because I'll bet she'll need us during this time. She's sent out into the wilderness away from her people, so inserting the notion, reach out to Sue, make sure she knows how much we love her when she's in her wilderness, so she knows she's got us to come back to. But the transition of Sue leaving us is also not of the forever kind. We might miss Sue, but she's in a garden somewhere, and I'm not talking about some Edenic garden. I'm saying she's got dirt under her fingernails, real dirt. She'll be in her pool. She'll be with a grandchild. Or she'll be finding a dress on sale and happy about it. Or she'll be saying something kind to a stranger and turning their day around. Even though we're here with all this stuff. Well, she's out gallivanting around. I encourage you to go to the altar inside of you. Place your flowers there for Sue, for our church and our community, which is experiencing transition, and for the person you'll emerge into when you encounter new perspectives from a new spiritual leader, where you continue to ponder everything Sue's taught us, and that continues to change you and your thinking. Every now and then you'll read something, you'll be like, Sue said that. I wasn't ready for that then, but there it is. Now, yes. Sue's permanently part of us, and her great intellect and spirit will continue to inform our thinking as we change. When the gardens mature, you don't need to do so much weeding, right? So here we stand, tall, full-fruited, and glorious. Now, I have a poem I wrote for Sue, if you'll indulge me. I'm going to shut this. Poem for Sue. On my computer. You know what heliotropism is? That guy knows. Wow, there's a giant fire. By the way, I just burned my fence down at home a couple weeks ago, so still traumatized. We got a fire on the screen because I turned my computer off. But that's appropriate because the fire too burns. Heliotropism is how sunflowers and other flowers follow the sun. They young, it's in the poem, young sunflowers do that. They follow the sun from the east to the west. A mature sunflower always fixed on the east. They know where the light comes from. So this poem is called Heliotropism for Sue on her retirement. There's mention of the relationship between Van Gogh and his friend Paul Gauguin, who came to stay with him for 2 months in a room that was full of Van Gogh's sunflowers. She loved to paint, which is, I'd love to be in that room, wouldn't you? So amazing to think about. Heliotropism. For Van Gogh, the sunflower was sacred. He saw it as a symbol of light, a tiny sun nodding and turning toward its mother from a field of sister stars. Did you know each blossom is made up of smaller ones? 1,000 to 4,000, this book says, both freckling and circling its face. But of all the facts about sunflowers, I like this one the most. How in its youth, its hopeful cheek will follow the sun across the field, and because it is the first to warm, it beckons 5 times as many pollinators as its smaller, more fixed fellows. The tallest clocked in at 30 feet, and I like to see volunteers standing unabashed in a Kansas wheat field, comfortable and radiant among all kinds. You know I'm talking about Sue. It's how poets process things. They find a like thing and pin every feeling onto it. And that's me with the blossom, which made Vincent so happy he brightened the guest room with golden discs on the chance they would bring a smile to his Paul. The likenesses go on and on if you open yourself to them. And this is all the evangelism I needed. How she told us to stand tall in our truth and trust that blessings will find us in good measure, will be poured into our lap, pressed down, running over, and oozing out. Did I mention how when mature, the sunflower fixes its gaze? It points forever eastward because it has learned where the light comes from, and it's always eager to see what glory will come next. And that's it for me. Thanks for coming today. Have some announcements.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
I love that.
Oh, thanks. We'll get through a copy. Okay, meditations tonight at 6. Open to everyone. I love it so much. Got a few meditators in here, Gary and Elby. As suggested in the town hall meeting, everyone's invited to participate in the daily prayer at 9 p.m. to focus on the prosperity and growth of Unity of Springfield. So set an alarm and let's harness the power of collective prayer and meditation. There's a finance committee meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank goodness. This meeting will focus on strategic financial planning and key initiatives aimed at enhancing the financial well-being and long-term prosperity of Unity of Springfield. Your insights and ideas are welcome and vital as we explore opportunities for growth, efficiency, and sustainable success. And while you're at it, why don't you get on Venmo and make a little offering? That's my part. The Unity Drum Circle's this Thursday at 6:30. They meet on the first and third Thursdays of the month, and all are welcome. If you didn't attend Sue's retirement party yesterday, there's a table in the foyer for anyone who'd like to write a note. She'll be taking the box home with her, and there's food left over from the party, and it'll be in Fellowship Hall after the service. Next Sunday, please join Karen Craigo in the New Thought and World Religion class, that's me, for Genesis, Making the Most of New Beginnings. And I'm talking about poetry in this one. She's talking about how when you get a chance for a fresh start, how you can make that count. I don't know how far I'm going into Unity principles with that. This might be Craigo principles. Next Sunday, Marlene Bricker will be the guest speaker for the celebration service. She has a wide range of speaking and teaching experience, from being an elementary school teacher, author, business owner, and spiritual director of the Unity Church. She holds a Master of Education in Guidance and Counseling and a doctorate in Metaphysics. That's fascinating. Our Youth of Unity, YRU, are planning a Help Us Get to Rally pancake breakfast fundraiser on May 25th. They're accepting donations of food and money. You'll be at the table in the foyer if you'd like to donate. Next page. A lot of announcements today. Please join us for our first Community Through Music concert on May 31st at 7 p.m. Summer concert series held on the last Saturday of each month, May to September. Local artists who will be performing this month are Chris Cates, Seth Hunt, and Little Things Collective. All right. Thank you. Thanks for joining me. Yay.
Appreciate that. I love that. I keep the people in my life that I physically lost over the years. I actually go through them in my meditations.
Yeah.
When I think about the things that they brought into my life and how they changed my life, and the love that they brought to the world, and then I think about how the world was actually they were here. And in that way, I keep people alive.
You know, know what bothers me? And your way offers a palliative to this, but like when I lost my ex-husband, who was my very best friend in the world, I thought I'd see him. I thought he'd be by from time to time.
Yeah.
I thought, and I did once go out on the back porch, and there was a possum that I thought, that's Chuck. Chuck's here. He's the possum. Never saw the possum again in quite the same way, where I was just sitting there and he walked by. But my people don't visit me, and I hope they would. I'm superstitious, I guess.
No dreams or anything like that?
No.
Yeah.
And I wanted that. So I don't know, but your way, the onus is on you to bring it back.
Yeah.
They're dead. They don't have to come back. They
Well,
got stuff to do.
and to me, when I'm sitting in meditation, I'll always thank my ancestors, my parents, my grandparents, for what they gave me and how they taught me. And then I'll just open that up to the thoughts of those who've gone. I often go to those who, we've lost in this church. Sometimes it'll be childhood friends that are gone, high school graduates, college, friends. My friends from yoga, my friends from my businesses I have. It's probably in the hundreds now. I used to write them all down. Every time I lost someone, they would go in my book. And
Literal book of the dead.
it really is. It's a way for me to keep their memory alive and to give thanks for what they brought.
I like that. Because I was waiting for something to show. And I thought, it's a failure of my perception. And then I thought, it's a failure of my imagination. But I couldn't quite figure out why they weren't coming. And then I look, my cat looks exactly like my dad. And it's like, maybe I'm not looking at
Maybe
it.
so.